Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming along to this session on coalition building to support sustainable digital data standards. I'd like to start by acknowledging and celebrating the first Australians whose traditional lands we meet, and we pay our respect to their elders, past and present. This session aims to bring together members of the research data community who have experience and interest in consortia and coalitions to advance the development and application of practices and standards relating to research data. We want to share success stories and ongoing challenges, hear about strategies that can hopefully catalyze the development of initiatives across stakeholders and disciplines, but I think importantly, try and identify where there are opportunities for cross-community collaboration to help ensure the long-term sustainability and success of research data standards. There are some collaborative notes. There's a bit.ly URL down the bottom there. This will crop up on other slides, so if people do want to contribute to those, please do. Just want to briefly acknowledge the people who are participating in this as what we've called a panel, although when it comes to the discussion, we won't make you sit up the top. We'll just sort of have this all the discussion taking place in the room here. Covering a range of different initiatives at different stages of maturity, hopefully with a spread of different experiences to share with us. And I'm grateful to everybody who's taken the time to put slides together, presentations, and contribute to the planning of this session. The outline will be that we will have a series of brief presentations from each of the panel participants. We're looking for sort of like up to sort of around 7 minutes, some maybe shorter. So hopefully none will be particularly longer than that. Be an opportunity for the panelists just to sort of like introduce their initiative so we all understand what it's about. But then highlight various learnings or challenges, drawing on a particular list that's given here, which is a list of sort of like key issues that we identified when putting the session together. Then we'll go into discussion session where we might want to focus in on some of these particular issues if they're of particular interest, but also think about that broader opportunity that there might be for wider collaboration. Are there needs that can be collectively addressed? How can we combine forces to address these? And what opportunity is there through organizations such as CoData or others to sort of like bring ourselves together and collaborate to help sustain our various standards? So we're going to start into the panel presentations now. I get to start by telling you a little bit about what's been going on with IUPAC and World Fair Chemistry, which to some extent was sort of like a seed for this particular presentation. And I think we're at a very beginning of the journey here in thinking about what it might mean to have a coalition for the sustainability of digital data standards in the chemical sciences. And I need to acknowledge here Leah McEwen, who's been in particular the driving force behind this, and also thank her for providing the slides that I'm about to present. So for those that don't know, IUPAC is essentially about defining the standards that enable the communication of chemistry, a common language, if you like. It's about naming chemical structures. It's about identifying the terminologies that you need to describe chemistry. It's about critically evaluated properties that are important in the practice of chemistry itself. Historically, this has been a very analog process, but for probably more than 10 years now, there's been elements of which have been starting to move into the digital age. Some are more advanced than others. We have standard identifiers for chemical structures. We have the Gold Book, which is a digitization of the terminologies that's taking place. We have formats for spectroscopy. And then as people are having increasingly digital needs, various other activities that IUPAC have been historically involved in, people have been looking at how those can be digitized. If we look, though, what it means to enable scientific standards, obviously there's a specification, and that's very much what IUPAC's involved in. But if we want these to be useful and adopted and used, we need toolkits from software and systems developers. We need applications that exploit those. And that requires a whole load of stakeholders, including cheminformaticians, software developers, not just sort of academic, but also commercial entities developing infrastructure and sort of applying these to various use cases. We also need policies that encourage people to adopt these, whether that comes from regulators, research funders, institutions, or publishers. And so we have a broad community with ongoing needs, ongoing costs, thinking about the accessibility and adoption and support. We need to think about the coordination and the management of all these activities and how we bring the community in, and then how these are governed. So with the seed of this idea for a coalition came towards the end of the World Fair Chemistry project. There was some time and resources and money left over. And so we convened a workshop in Cambridge in March 2024. And a driver behind this workshop was to draw on business modelling process, which sort of originated from Peter Drucker. Peter Drucker is the management consultant who coined the phrase that culture eats strategy for breakfast. But he also was very much interested in understanding who is the customer and what the customer value is of a product. And it was Dana van der Waal, who's been involved in initiatives such as Allotrope, as well as in the sort of wider life science community, who wanted to sort of apply this to digital standards development. And so we had a workshop in Cambridge, which had representatives from across scientific unions, industry alliances, academia, data organizations, not just in chemistry, but also in the life science, earth sciences, and materials community, to try and apply this sort of approach to standards to see what this would reveal. And so we ended up with a lot of post-it notes and a lot of charts, but I think importantly some identification of some common needs. Needs around communicating standards, but also differentiating the different roles that they have to play. Needs for resources to build relationships within the community. The need for infrastructure and expertise to develop these standards, not just strategically, but also technically, and then understanding the funding and revenue models that can help us sort of sustain this, and I think accelerate the development of these standards as well. The world is moving very, very fast. It is a challenge to keep the standards activities, moving fast enough to keep up. And so the question is, what are the opportunities for sharing and coordinating expertise and resources? And I think there's a lot of them. Then this year there was a follow-on workshop. This was co-organized by the Center for Transformation of Chemistry in Germany and the Bellstein Institute. And there it was a case of building on that previous workshop to try and establish what community assets we might need to support adoption, identifying use cases, thinking about how we develop collective messaging. But then importantly, there was a sort of follow-on meeting after the sort of main part of that workshop, which was looking to think about how we launch a community coalition to drive ongoing collaboration and development. Two broad areas of opportunity sort of emerged. The one at the bottom here, I'll start with something concrete, having a standards map for the chemical sciences, understanding what standards are out there, whether they be formal or de facto, because, there's still a lot of education of the wider community to let people know what's out there, so partly so they don't go away and invent more new standards as well. But I think the other is around identifying value propositions we can pitch to the community to encourage them to actively invest in standards. Propositions around adopting the standards to enable reuse, whether that be through tools and database providers adopting these standards or embedding them in workflows. Developing the standards by drawing on community needs and individuals who might have an enthusiasm for this sort of thing. And of course, sustaining these long term. I think it's worth sort of understanding the various aspects that go into sustaining something, and I'm sure this is common to most of the initiatives we're going to talk about. It's about identifying the need, it's reviewing the opportunity, creating the standard in the first place, but then getting it adopted, updating it in kind of as a result of experience, and then thinking about how you sustain that particular cycle. And this was put together by Nick Lynch of Koepler Research, who's had experience of sort of like standards development within the pharmaceutical industry context. A key point here is lots of different stakeholders are important around this particular cycle. We need lots of different experiences, lots of different technologies involved. And so for the IUPAC part of this, our next steps is that we're going to have a smaller meeting of a smaller sort of like planning meeting in London to think about what our priorities are for actually turning this idea of a coalition into practice. Important thing here will, I think, be cultivating a vision that we can sort of pitch to various other people to gain interest. But the questions we have at this stage is what's necessary to get started. How do we develop the leadership that's needed to initiate engagement and coordination across communities? How do we communicate with other initiatives, other activities that are going on and might be relevant? And of course, how do we get the resources to do all that? So this is what sort of fed into this sort of like session, because we wanted to hear from other people who might have experiences or similar challenges, and hopefully we'll be able to address some of these as we go along. So that ends my introduction, and we'll now go on to the next presentation and move over to Earth Sciences and hear from Mark.
Thanks, Ian. So I am going to address, what have I done? There we go. So I'm going to talk about the geological world, and specifically through the work under the International Union for Geological Sciences, and specifically the Commission for the Management and Application of Geoscience Information. Bit of a mouthful, we'll call it CGI from here on. So CGI has this role within IUGS to develop standards and look after information matters, and to that end, and this is kind of how we do it. So CGI is a commission in the middle there. We under the IUGS umbrella with a lot of other commissions and other groups within the commission, within the union. And operationally, we have a bunch of working groups underneath CGI, which refer to different types of the standards building process. CGI is a relatively mature, the standards we have developed in CGI are relatively mature. A lot of them began in the early 2000s. We developed some data models and we were looking at terminology from the early 2000s. And in many ways, we've sort of plateaued, if you like, in terms of that maturity. So we've developed these models, these vocabularies. They've reached a certain level of maturity. By no means are they perfect, but they are operational and they are applied. They're used throughout the geological world. One point of difference, perhaps, with many of the other groups in this room is that geology is inherently spatial. So we deal in a lot of map-type information, and maps are scale appropriate. So we deal with maps at international scale, and some of our standards can also be used at regional to local scales. And each of those brings new challenges in terms of different requirements around terminologies, vocabularies, and so on. But the CGI role is primarily about what's happening across borders. Geology doesn't respect state, province, or national borders, so we need to understand what's happening, what are the common elements that we see on either sides of borders. So, as I said, there's two logical data models which basically underpin a lot of the CGI work to date, the GeoSciML and the Earth Resource ML. So one describes mainstream geological relationships, the other one describes mineral and resource information. And each of those have got a number of vocabularies. The models themselves identify about 130 vocabularies, some of which are yet to be started, but those tend to be the lower priority ones. And we do have published about 56 already, and those are SCOS vocabularies which are available from a server from courtesy of Geoscience Australia. These are reasonably sophisticated vocabularies. They're hierarchical, they've got synonyms and definitions and sources, and we do have some multilingual translations of some of those terms as well. And these vocabularies are getting used in many other vocabularies at different scales. So, for example, the Geological Survey of Queensland is one of the leading adopters of geoscience terminology and vocabularies themselves, and they're using a lot of the CGI input as part of their system. So the development of our standards has been pretty, it comes in waves. So we have periods of intense activity, and this is what I was referring to the 2000s and the early 2010s, where we had projects, or we had countries with like-minded ideas about what they wanted to achieve, and that coincided to generate discussion, enthusiasm, etc. And one of those defining projects was the One Geology project in the around 2008 or 9, and that had this bold concept of wanting to unify geological data across the world and ultimately create a digital representation of a map. And that actually drove a lot of the standards. So it was actually the project, that signature project, that really got everyone together and really developing and also encouraging the less technically able to join in. And when these are the geological surveys around the world. I guess the problem is that projects always end, and then you've got a problem. You've got a bunch of standards, but then the enthusiasm to keep them ticking over, to keep them updated, tends to wane, or you just don't have the resources available to do it. And so that becomes one of our greatest challenges, is how to ride those troughs of enthusiasm and keep our standards refreshed and updated. So. And we also need to be promoting those standards. So if we don't keep telling the world they exist, then people will forget them pretty quickly. So, and that's also, again, a bit difficult in a period when you don't have this collective will to try and get these standards up in the line of sight. So, to the points that Ian mentioned in terms of the things that I'd like to address, there's 3 of them. What CGI has is a strong leadership governance structure, and that's the product of a couple of decades of intense work, and that structure has persisted. The problem is that we don't have a great deal of resources, and we don't have defining projects which are keeping that enthusiasm working. So we have this issue about maintaining momentum in terms of our activities over time. So this is, and I really don't know what the solution is for this. It's funding related, obviously, and it's a lack of collective will, or will to do something all at the same time, because without that discussion process, then you're working in a vacuum. And so I guess the other thing I wanted to address is that, I think we need strategies for ensuring our sustainability of activities and output. And this is why this particular forum was of interest to me, because of the coalition concept as a way of pooling those resources together, and hopefully that through that our meagre resources can be sort of combined to create something that actually makes things viable. I'll leave it there.
Very much. Just flick to the next slide. Next, aha. So we'll go to a more recent sort of Earth Sciences initiative. And Kerstin's going to talk to us about that. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, clearly. Whoops. Is this working as well? So I wanted to briefly present One Geochemistry, and we're like way in the early stages as compared to what we heard about CGI. One Geochemistry is a global initiative that brings together data providers in geochemistry with the goal to establish standards that give geochemical data more relevance and more use. Just for those who may not be familiar with geochemistry, it's studying natural materials of the solid solid earths, including sediments, including rocks, and so on, for their chemical composition and deriving Earth system processes from that and historical evolution of the Earth. And what I wanted to say with this slide is there is a lot of diversity. There are many different communities, from studying paleoclimate to mineral resources to volcanoes, that use geochemistry on a lot of different samples. And that makes this effort of one geochemistry really difficult, because we have a huge variety of analyzed variables, methods, data formats, and so standards have to be very diverse in many ways. And in addition, we have a highly fragmented data landscape with lots of smaller databases and data providers that are regional, institutional, national, and so on. I can skip these two. So the strategy that we actually employed was to first establish an organizational structure and trying to find funding, then engage with stakeholders, and then finally get to the development of the standards and their implementation. Now, in this scenario, we haven't gotten very far, but we have at least made some progress. And when we're talking about timelines here, it really shows how you expect to move forward with some enthusiastic participants, but it does go really slow. We did manage to establish a governance. It took quite a long time, but what was critical in this was our participation in the World Fair project that Ian already talked about, because it set us timelines. It gave us some funding for a project coordinator. So we established the governance, and we identified a methodology for the standards development. We actually became a co-data working group that still gives stability to the initiative. But we're now in a phase where we don't have funding anymore. So it's become, again, a volunteer effort. We've done a lot to engage stakeholders in this game. We have done a lot of town halls at conferences and informed researchers about the relevance of standards. We have always received very positive feedback, but unfortunately no funding yet. We had some connection made to the commercial sector, to mineral exploration, and they were at least open to potentially funding something, but it hasn't happened yet. We have reached out to the scientific societies, and that has been successful as well. And I'm showing down here the 6 societies that have actually endorsed the One Geochemistry effort. The challenge here is that geochemistry doesn't just have one union or society that represents the science. It's a huge diversity of societies, so we have to reach out to many and have to coordinate across that. With respect to standards development, as I mentioned, through the World Fair project, we have actually agreed on a methodology how to move forward that was really involving these fair implementation profiles and fair enabling resources. That seems to be changing in World Fair Plus now, so we have to actually adjust a bit to that. We did agree on a fair vocabulary for analytical methods that is being evolved. There's ongoing work among these data providers. And we're now engaging community members in working groups to define minimum information standards for analytical protocols and analytical methods. What we realized is that there is no clear definition of what is an analytical technique versus an analytical method versus an analytical protocol. And so just here at this meeting, we have been having discussions in how do we move forward to at least come up with consistent definitions across these. So a quick summary of what our lessons learned so far have been. clearly the heterogeneity of the analytical techniques and methods that we're dealing with, together with this complexity of a long tail data landscape, makes it really difficult. It's a real rocky road to come up with globally agreed standards and a sustainability model for the long term. What we also realized is that these participants, the data providers, have their own project timelines, their own resource limitations, the problems, and that is a constant tension with actually moving forward with standards and overhauling systems to comply with that. That's a really difficult one. But what was critical to even getting to the point where we are now was the collaboration in World Fair with other entities, and that, you know, has made us really stick on with talking or participating in these workshops that Ian mentioned and so on. We really want to stay in this game because we're benefiting tremendously from doing this with others. Yeah, and we're back to an unfunded volunteer effort, so we expect progress to even get slower now. So that was the view from One Geochemistry. Okay, and who's next?
Excellent, thank you very much. So yes, from geochemistry to genomics. The only link I can think of, they both begin with G, but you know.
We've got a couple of other letters in common. Thanks for the opportunity to speak today. I'm your spokesperson, and the reason I got asked is because I'm a local. I'm just at the university down the road, but I'm one of about 15 board members on the Genomic Standards Consortium. I looked up the mission statement for the GSC, and it's making genomic data discoverable, and you might think that's pretty easily discoverable if you go to NCBI. I guess I should think of my audience here. They're not everybody in the life sciences, but you can get tons and tons of genomic data very easily. So it's more about getting the relevant genomic data discoverable. And then as part of that, you can only make good use of genomic data if you have comparative data or so-called metadata. So it's enabling the integration of that genome data with other types of data and making that as standardized as possible. This is a brief timeline. So it's been going for 20 years, so it's fairly mature, I guess, I'd say at this point. For most of that time, it's been fully volunteer effort, very enthusiastic volunteers, and I'll explain in a minute how we've maintained momentum on that. It was established by Dawn Field in 2005, so by that point it was becoming apparent that genome sequencing was getting cheaper and faster and more organisms were being sequenced. So trying to get it quite early on, and it was very prescient of Dawn, to try and get a community together from the grassroots that are interested in coming up with some standards. And so by 2007, a couple of ontologies had been developed. The ENVO, or environmental ontology, to capture environmental features, which are very diverse, depending on which environment you're looking at, and also GAS, a geographic location ontology. And then that was, because that is an endless list, that was put into the framework of a minimal information. So if you have people coming into the field and they want to describe their genomic data and their associated metadata, what is the minimum data that they should be submitting? So that became then a checklist for the INSDC databases. So they worked together in order to set that up. And then to showcase this, and journal was actually initiated, again, all voluntarily. That was driven by George Garrity, which I thought was a very bold move. But basically to have these genome reports of microorganisms and use these standardized minimal information as part of the publication. Unfortunately, that journal is no longer because it was flagged as too many self-citations, which is a bit ironic. But actually, it was a useful vehicle for having standardized information about genome sequences that are relatively well cited, and it's carried on in other formats. The GSC was formalized in 2009. The editorial board was established. There's currently about 15 or 16 members. The journal was launched that same year. And then in 2013, the minimal information was extended to a whole range of project-based things. So environmental packages and minimal information about anything. And then, so I'll just jump to from 2015 to 2019, these standards started to expand based on from the user feedback. And so there's one on hydrocarbons, built environment, plants, viruses, and eukaryotes, just to name a few. And in 2024, GSC became a non-profit, which means now the consortium can apply for money to support efforts. But for 20 years, it's worked pretty well on a purely voluntary basis. Okay, so just addressing one point so we can spend more time in the discussion, that's maintaining momentum, which I think is a big challenge for many of these efforts. So the first thing is that they are project-based. That's really important. So we have invested stakeholders. So often now, as the GSC has become more known, we're actually approached by a particular research community that want help in developing minimal standards for their particular field. We have annual in-person meetings all around the globe because the board is all around the globe, and that's always great fun. It's turned into a local sort of symposium. So we had one in Thailand, for instance, a couple of years back, and we had the local microbiology community attending and giving talks. But more importantly, there's a very active online engagement through Slack and WhatsApp. I mean, I don't have a particular opinion about what platform it is. It's only that it gets used. And so there's often very vigorous debates going on between people that are on different sides of the planet. And that's been pretty successful, I would say. So I'd say the most successful outcome from the GSC is this minimal information about things. And these are some examples. And if you look at, it's always with the goal of publishing a paper to announce the new minimal standards. So these are some, oh, sorry, I've jumped to a slide here. So this is enabled by a standardized workflow that was developed by the GSC. So rather than a community coming to us and completely not knowing what to do, they get a sort of a how-to handbook about what they should be doing. And so these are the papers. So all I'll say is that it's an ongoing project-focused expansion, and you can tell it's community-led because of the number of authors on the papers, and you can tell it's accepted by the user community by the number of citations. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Life science from Chuck about the Global Biodata Coalition.
Great, thanks. I'd like to thank Phil for showing a picture of me. I'm in that picture somewhere, about 5 pixels of it. Getting going, I'm going to talk about the Global Biodata Coalition very briefly. This is not particularly about standards, it's more about how to build a coalition, how to build an organization. So what is the problem we were trying to address? Well, it wasn't me at this time, but I joined shortly after. And the problem is ensuring sustainable funding for biodata resources. Biodata resources have already been described. For instance, the INSTC genomic databases that store DNA and RNA sequence data available for life scientists. There are thousands and thousands of such open access databases making different kinds of data accessible for researchers. Some of them, of course, are quite large and really important, and some of them are smaller and used by much smaller communities. But all of them have the general challenge of maintaining funding over time. So the Global Biodata Coalition started rather unusually as a top-down effort. So most biodata resources, in particular the very large ones, are supported by global research funders, especially those in the United States and in the UK and in Europe. And those funders have been funding those for many years. They put a lot of money into them, and they're used globally. So funders would like to distribute the load of funding these to other organizations and funding bodies around the world, and indeed to other stakeholders if for instance, private sector money could come into it as well. So that's the challenge. How do you support these things over time? And the funders cannot promise to support these over long periods of time because most of them are subject to annual budgets from their government. So they can't really promise anything more than 1 year out into the future. Okay, so how is this problem addressed? Well, you saw these papers here were published in 2015 and 2017. And that formalized the problem. It had been identified and discussed much earlier. So some of those funders and major stakeholders, which is to say the managers of some of the larger database resources, got together in a series of meetings in the second half of the last decade to discuss what to do about this problem. The heads of international research organizations, which is a group of the leaders of big funding bodies like NIH and BBSRC and the European Commission, were involved in the sense that they heard about this and supported it. And in some cases, that meant they put a little bit of seed money in to help the GBC Secretariat get going. A steering group was established in 2017. Seed funding, as I just mentioned, came along. In 2020, the Secretariat was launched with website and branding and a letter of understanding which describes the governance of the organization, which I'll talk about in a couple of slides. With the formal start of it, there was a scientific program, a scientific advisory committee was appointed, an executive director, and then crucially some actual work was started. So we produced an inventory of global biodata resources. I won't describe these in detail. And we did something called, we undertook selection of global core biodata resources, which are very important resources that are used by large numbers of life scientists globally. And Genji will talk about PDB, which is one of the GCBRs in a little while. And then we have been hosted by the Human Frontiers Science Program Organization, which was always intended to be temporary. They're in Strasbourg. And we'll now move to permanent hosting with a large grant from the European Commission starting in 2026. So just a few snippets of how we developed what the GBC was. A really important thing was what's it called? What's it going to be called? So there was one of these meetings I just talked about in 2018 was in Tokyo, hosted by one of the Japanese funding bodies. And about a third of the whole meeting over 2 days was a discussion of what to call the organization. And all kinds of names were bandied about and listed. And I couldn't find the notes because I was there and I wrote down. But in the end, we just called it Global Biodata Coalition. So you can see this 2015 paper almost had the name already. But that was a really important thing because it's turned out to be simple and fairly descriptive, and because of that, I think GBC has become fairly well known. And at the moment, we only have 6 people who together work 4 FTEs, so not everyone is even full-time, but I think we pull above our weight in terms of influence in the field. So then we also worked, in fact, this was me working on this, identifying, developing a corporate identity. We had to secure a domain name, which was, of course, related to the name we chose for the organization, because you want your domain name to look at something like the name of the organization. We developed a logo, corporate identity. We built a website, and then we developed a comms strategy. And communications are very important. Most of us at the time, there were only a couple of us, are like me as a life scientist. I know nothing about comms. I was not the person to run the comms strategy. So we brought someone in who's an expert. It was an incredibly good decision. You really need to think about the publicity and communications with your stakeholders. Governance. So the governance was developed intentionally very light. So funders, anyone who funds life science data research can become a member. Membership, in practice, most of them are large charities, for instance, Wellcome or Chan Zuckerberg, or national funders, for instance, Genome Canada, UKRI in the UK, NIH. Each member is asked to make a voluntary contribution which supports the Secretariat. It's a very small amount of money. It's not supporting data resources. It's just providing money for the Secretariat, basically salaries and a little bit of travel money. Each board member gets one vote, regardless of how much they contribute. The contribution rate is tiered depending on the research funder's own budget, but there's only 3 tiers. It's very simple. The letter of understanding is not legally binding. It's completely informal. Funders can join or withdraw at any time. And as I said, the contributions are voluntary. The aims of the GBC, so this was part of developing the strategy or the mission, is to be a forum for the funders of resources to better coordinate and share information with each other. So it's in some ways it's just a club for research funding bodies to talk about data resources. And the secondary aim was to stabilize and ensure financial support for the infrastructure of data resources, and in particular for this set of core biodata resources, really important resources that we identified. And of course, we had to develop a methodology to identify those before that could happen. Who are the stakeholders? So there's 3 sets of stakeholders that we have. First of all is the research funding bodies and the members. So communications with them are, especially to the members, are bespoke. They're, we have messages to our board members. We have board meetings. We talk about how to further the aims of the GBC with those members. The other key stakeholders are the managers of the biodata resources themselves. They have to be engaged, and they have to have buy-in to what we're doing. Now there's a bit of tension here because those managers, those stakeholders expect the GBC to find ways to get more money for them. Whereas the research funding bodies, who are the members, expect the GBC to find more money in the world to help them to support the data resources. So the current funding members, of course, their goal is to get more money into the system, not to pay more money not to put up even more money than they already are for the resources. And then the third set of stakeholders is just anyone who does life science research, because everyone doing life science research is using these biodata resources now. In fact, they're crucially dependent on them. I doubt that there are many biologists who don't use some data resources in some way. So for all those stakeholders, there's a whole series of ways we communicate through blogs, peer-reviewed publications, LinkedIn. There's a newsletter, there's an annual report, and we tweet. But, and I said avoid over-communicating here. So we're a small organization. We don't put out 5 tweets a day. We don't put out 7 LinkedIn messages every day. We're fairly careful about the volume and the frequency of our communications. And partially that's because we're small, but it's also, of course, we don't have too many people, so we couldn't really. If we tried to ramp it up, it would probably get sloppy. So the most challenging aspect, or the most challenging thing we do, is actually to attract new members to the club, so to speak. So it's extremely time-consuming. It requires in-person visits to wherever you are looking to get the members to join. So on the right-hand side, the executive director, Guy Cochran, and I have been to India 2 or 3 times, engaging with the Indian funding bodies to try to get them to join. We have extremely strong support from scientists in India. We know many of them. There are large data resources in India. We're well connected. But getting their funding body to make a decision on joining the GBC has been extremely difficult. And this is basically a bureaucratic problem. It's not a financial problem. The amount of money we're asking them to contribute is so small that it's 7 decimal points at the bottom of their budget. It's just a bureaucratic issue. And the other challenge, of course, we have is that we've had a lack of staff. We don't really have enough people to have, for instance, a full-time person devoted to this. And the reason for that isn't lack of funds. We probably have funds to bring on 1 or 2 more people. It's that our hosting arrangement with HFSP has been short-term and just extended over short periods of time. So we haven't been able to bring anyone in with a guarantee that we would have them employed for more than a year. Now that we're moving to a more permanent hosting arrangement, we expect this to change. Timescales, well, has been alluded to before, much slower than we expected, although we probably should have expected it to be slow. Recruiting new members, establishing a legal entity, engaging board members, and growing the secretariat, again, the staffing issue, have all been fairly slow. On the other hand, the things that we could do and control ourselves, which is what we call our science program, identifying global core biodata resources, undertaking an inventory, those have been very easy to control and went exactly as we expected, because that was all in-house. So that's all I have to say. Obviously, there's a lot of other things I could talk about in developing an organization, but I'll stop there.
Thank you very much for sharing those insights. And so we'll now hear from one of those core resources that's been identified and one that operates with a consortium model underneath it. So over to Genji. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. As one of the global biodata resources, and I present about our single global archive, how we can manage and how we can form this single global archive on behalf of the Worldwide Protein Data Bank. First, Protein Data Bank is an archive of experimentally determined macromolecular structure, which include cryo-electron microscopy and crystallography, and also high-field NMR spectroscopy. All these data are processed by WWPDB BioCurator and form a single global archive, which include not only the protein data bank, also include the electron microscopy data bank, that is this kind of experimentally determined map, and also BMRB and NMR spectra. These 3 are included in our core archives. Then PDB was born in 1971, already more than 50 years old, then around here. And then this is a history of our core archives. Then since I got the PhD in 1997 around here, then at the time, structure determination itself is quite difficult. But now it's very automatic and more data are deposited. Then in 2008, IUCR, International Union of Crystallography, strongly recommend to submit the experimental data together, not only the coordinates or structure factors in case of crystallography. It should be deposited mandatorily for protein data bank deposition. Then first, protein data bank was born in the United States and then managed by Brookhaven National Lab for a long time. And then into 1998, PDB-E was formed in EBI, and also the Brookhaven PDB is transferred to RCSP PDB, mainly at Rutgers University. And then 2000, Protein Data Bank Japan formed. Then there are 3 regional data centers. If these 3 regional data centers are independently works and if no coordination, then data becomes no more single archive. Then these 3 leaders faced together and to form a worldwide protein data bank in 2003. Then these three leaders formed a charter, and then how to coordinate the database management, and such kind of things are written in very formal charter. And then later that charter are updated, how to invite new members to our international consortium and more detailed things, this kind of thing. And then legal team of each institution have checked the wording and very carefully. Then now the third version or fourth version of the charter are available on the web. Then from 2003, these single global archives are internationally jointly managed. Then historically, we have computationally predicted models also, but if my memory is correct, 2006 or 8, that kind of computational models are excluded, and only experimentally determined these kind of three coordinates, three data sets can be accepted. And all of these are machine readable and can become textbook data for AlphaFold computational predictions. Then other computationally predicted models and raw images and so on are now we assigned that was a federated archive. Then organization. Then this is a bit old photo. This is me. And then now RCSB PDB and PDB-E and PDB-J and NMR archive and cryo-EM archive, these fives are core members. And now we have associate member from China and a potential associate member from India. These are the membership. And then originally we do not have associate members, but now after updating the charter, we invited a Chinese group to be associate member. And also the stakeholders are crystallography and NMR spectroscopy and cryo-EM communities. Then we invited these kind of top scientists to be advisors to our single global archive. And then annually we are hosting this kind of advisory committee meeting. And also working group meetings and validation task force meetings and workshops. We are occasionally hosting these kind of workshops to have a recommendation from the community and the stakeholders. And then this is now geographical assignments. These red color regions, data are automatically redirected to PDB-J, and this green colors are sent automatically to PDB-E, and this blue color is go to the RCSB PDB. Data from Australia here, if the depositor deposited, automatically redirected to the American PDB. This is our regional assignments currently. And also communication with the journals. Now we asked all journals to link our WWPDB DOI landing pages. Historically, the links to the PDB was RCSB PDB because American PDB was oldest. But it's not fair. Yeah, then we asked the journals to make this, to link to this kind of landing page. And then users can choose a European PDB, American PDB, or Japanese PDB. And then this works very well, and all journals kindly agreed to this kind of arrangement. And also the communication with the communities. Then now we provided validation reports. That is, since the structural data is very specialized in each technique, then even non-specialists want to know how good the data is, how bad the data is. Then we formed the official validation report, how much that data fitted to the experimental data. These kind of validation reports are recommended by communities. Then we asked the community to form this kind of validation task force to make what kind of validation should be done to validate all data. And then all three methods, crystallography, NMR spectroscopy, 3D EM, all has official validation reports for the reviewers and users. And the challenge is, now all 3 regional data centers have their own data out services. For example, our Asian PDB has their own local languages pages, Japanese, Chinese, and Korean. This is very good for the high school students and also school teachers. Then other American PDB and European PDB has their own strategy to develop the data, but a kind of overlap. And also all data processing system, annotation system, and so on, we have our own local servers independently, a kind of overlap. Then to save the money, then we may need some kind of a cloud system to coordinate that kind of international collaboration. That is the challenge. Okay, this is an international collaboration. This is a Japanese PDB, European PDB, and American PDB. Thank you for your attention.
So we're going to finish with the final presentation, which is a double act. I think we've heard about sort of like how we've coordinated across the protein crystallography world. I think these are 2 initiatives that are trying to coordinate across chemistry and physical sciences. Felix is going to introduce NFDI for Chem, Nicky's going to introduce PSDI, and they're going to share their sort of challenges with us.
Mm-hmm. So hello, I'm jumping in for Oliver Koepler, actually, because he felt a bit sick in the morning. So I'm also a co-spokesperson of NFDI for Chem, and I'll do my best to be concise and present NFDI for Chem, which is the chemistry consortium within the NFDI. The NFDI is a large initiative in Germany, the German National Research Data Infrastructure. And we deal with the data handling in the whole of the research data cycle. So we try to cover all the phases that range from the creation of the data until the reuse. And this, of course, starts in the lab for the chemists. And we propose a smart lab approach where the chemists work in the lab doing their experiments with tools like electronic lab notebooks. So these are systems where all the devices that are used, the measurement devices, can be connected to that software, so it's easy to transfer the data directly and capture the whole context of the data creation as well, already in a structured form. And that makes it then easy to transfer it over to repositories where the data can be published and again annotated with further metadata. And also here the data is archived, and we guarantee an archiving for at least 25 years, which is pretty long. So data access is guaranteed for a long time. And we have repositories for any type of data that is relevant within chemistry. So there are dedicated repositories that are really specialized for a certain data type, and there are multidisciplinary repositories that are more generic and allow data deposition of any type of data. Of course, chemists also need to find and reuse the data afterwards, so metadata plays a crucial role. The metadata is harvested from the repositories and then made available in a global search. I'll go a bit into the details later. And of course, standards are also quite important for that. And another big topic is we try to foster a cultural change in Germany and also beyond in chemistry. And we try to convince chemists to use our trusted digital workflows and tools. We deal mostly, or we focus on data describing molecules and related data, also associated data. So, of course, reactions play a crucial role, the properties of the molecules, and other associated types of data like spectroscopy data, so for example NMR data and mass spectroscopy. the harmonization across and beyond resources is really important, and that's why we try, as other initiatives do this as well, to define minimum information for chemical investigations. So in short, MICHI, and here the chemists and also RDM experts and computer scientists work closely together, and this is a holistic approach, so it includes guideline articles, checklists, data models, and also the implementation afterwards in our tools and services. Metadata and ontologies. So as I said, so the MICHI, the minimum information about chemical investigations, defines sort of what to report, what to collect. So this is the minimum that needs to be collected. The metadata schema then define how to describe these data, and the schemas and the ontologies together form the semantic foundation and enable metadata harvesting and search. So as I said, the metadata is harvested from the repositories via standard interfaces like OAI PMH, and is then indexed in a global index, and then there's the NFDI for Chem search service, a global platform where the chemists can search in a chemistry-specific way, so search for chemistry terms. And these terms and the ontologies are provided by the terminology service of the TAB Hannover, the NFDI for Chem terminology service, but this is also a crucial part of the base for NFDI terminology service, short TS for NFDI. And this provides an API that the services and the tools can then use to fetch the terminology that is needed and provide the terms in their service. And if you want to know more about NFDI for Chem, just visit the website nfdi4chem.de, or you can scan the QR code, and I'm around, and hopefully Oliver is recovering soon. And I hand over to Nicola.
Thank you very much. So I'm Nicola Knight. I am the PSDI coordinator. So that's for the Physical Sciences Data Infrastructure project that's based in the UK. So we are funded by the UK Research and Innovation Funding Council through their Engineering and Physical Sciences section and the Digital Research Infrastructure programme. So I'm going to give you a very quick kind of introduction to some of the stuff. We are quite a young project compared to most of the people who've come up and given presentations so far. But basically what we're trying to do is provide this kind of layer of the data infrastructure that connects and builds upon these existing experimental or computational facilities in the physical sciences. So quite a broad remit, but also cross-linking to other domains. So quite a lot of similarities with the NFDI for Chem, which we often refer to as kind of our sister project. Obviously, we're based in the UK and they're based in Germany. But some of the stuff that we kind of want to focus on is this kind of platform for being able to collect this data together, integrate it, support this analysis both across experimental data, simulation data, and also reference data in terms of making data more fair and providing these tools to really kind of make researchers be able to do more with the data that they are doing and the research investment that is being made in the work that they're doing, but also critically be able to provide resources or space so that this data can be supported beyond the individual lifespan of a research project. So I'm sure we're all aware, so much data is just simply lost. So at the moment we're kind of focusing on the core kind of area of the chemistry and materials, but also related disciplines, and kind of some of the things that we do are quite domain agnostic. So we have quite a number of partners that are involved in PSDI. Currently, the people mostly involved in PSDI are in some way or other funded through PSDI, and there's about 20 partners involved in PSDI, ranging from a national level all the way through to kind of local communities. And the work that we do in PSDI is kind of arranged around kind of 4 principal areas. So these are connecting existing infrastructures, so this is different kind of workflows and things between systems so that we build on things that have already been built. And this involves both national and international collaborations. The best use of data, so people being able to find data, having data that's well described and structured, and having workflows that then can work with that data. Crucially, and quite a key part, the best use of people. So this is around building these skills for the community and being able to share guidance so that people can do this better. Oh, good. PowerShell is coming up and doing some update. Great. Hopefully it won't restart the computer. And also the best use of technology, which is around building these tools and services and how we embed these standards and ontologies, vocabularies, all of these things in everything that we do. So a lot of the stuff that we do builds upon all of these standards and kind of the work that's being done in the community. And so this is a couple of the things that I put down in terms of some of the contributions and things that we are doing with relation to digital data standards. So obviously we're building a lot of these tools and services that I mentioned, and so these heavily rely on implementing data standards, so things like repositories, conversion tools, cross-data search services, and providing training for these. We have a whole range of learning kind of resources so that we can share good practice and case studies across the community. We obviously, in order to do this, have quite a lot of engagement and global collaborations, aligning for the data standards development, also trying to align with what different people are doing so that we can all work kind of and build on what people are doing rather than reinventing the wheel or doing the same thing and kind of wasting resources. And also in terms of obviously the standards and interoperability, which is a key component of a lot of the stuff that we do, is obviously the stuff around metadata, like standards, how you can semantically describe data, validate standards, so that you can actually kind of work with what you've got in the data. So we put together a couple of things in terms of our shared kind of strengths and some of the challenges that we have across NFDI and PSDI, because there are quite a lot of similarities. So some of the strengths are that both of these projects are community-driven. So we have a wide range of stakeholder groups on board, and we're embedded very much in this international network, so trying to bring together the people and kind of work sort of collaboratively. We work across, well, both of us, but specifically NFDI for Chem, kind of across all of the different areas, so from the specification all the way to the standards, and enabling that data to be created and go all the way through to reuse. And in terms of this is slightly better on the NFDI perspective than the PSDI, but in terms of the actual commitment from NFDI for that like longer term kind of commitment that the German government have made towards that, it's slightly less great in the UK at the moment, but that's something that's really strong in the NFDI. And obviously learning from these related disciplines, so the NFDI consortia, the PSDI and the DRI, where we can learn from different people who've done similar things, just not exactly in our discipline. Now, some of these challenges, I think, have kind of been, a couple of these have potentially been raised already. Obviously, there's a lot of technical fragmentation. The cultural barriers in terms of actually people getting on board with implementing things like standards across different institutions. This was definitely raised before, the different priorities and the timelines that make it difficult to kind of actually work together, whether that's actually about the technical side or more on the organizational side. And obviously, in terms of the overall governance, it kind of lacks these kind of formalized frameworks for people to really work together on the larger scale. But we identified in terms of some of these opportunities, we really think that this coalition building can really bring this sort of shared kind of training, the ability to do this feedback from the community, and really this cross-domain collaboration to really push forward this openness and interoperability. And hopefully that gives us a nice segue to go into the discussion.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all speakers. And let's just show some appreciation for everybody who contributed. Thank you. Yeah, so we have about 20 minutes. 20 minutes, which was the best we could hope for, but yeah. So I'll leave this one up for a little bit. It was the specific issues, in case people want to sort of like maybe tease into those. I've just got one general observation, I think, to start off, having listened to that set of talks. I think what we've heard about, almost working backwards, is sort of national initiatives that are trying to work across particular domains that want to access data resources that we heard about from sort of PDB and the sort of global biodata, coalition that might underpin these, you know, in a particular domain there, which need the standards that allow them to operate, driven by, in some cases, grassroots communities who identify a need and drive them, that then are perhaps reaching back into these national facilities. So there's quite a kind of broad, interesting, complex ecosystem, and I think the thought going through my head here is, can we really, and I say this, you know, with a degree of optimism, sort of combine all these different elements to sort of pull together to pitch that important need for, you know, kind of developing those standards that underpin this and sort of in a holistic kind of way. So I think there's lots to sort of possibly tease out there. But before I witter on anymore, does anyone have anything that they specifically want to ask of individuals or other observations that they want to raise?
Yeah, thank you. This is Matt Mayernick from the United States National Center for Atmospheric Research, and it's a very interesting talk, so I appreciate all of these talks. And as you said, there's a real variety of types of organizations and collaborations that were discussed. So I guess my question is, you know, if you go from a spectrum of, you know, fully sort of incorporated and with monetary contributions from members all the way to voluntary organizations, or at least currently voluntary. If you're starting from scratch, how do you know where to aim? I don't know that this is an easy question to answer, but you know, when do you know you need funding versus when can you move things forward in a voluntary organization? And you know, we all like funding, but it's also limited. So how do you know where to aim?
Well, you always want funding. But if you don't have funding, there's a whole series of examples of voluntary organizations. GSC is a really good example that moved forward quite well without any funding. I think crucially there was, and Phil can back me up here, there was a lot of stakeholder support. And the stakeholders included not only the people working on it, but their own organizations, which allowed them to basically contribute their own staff time to helping the organization. So there was a recognition by I know about EBI in the UK, because that was a lot of the people working on GSC were EBI. EBI recognized the need to have standards and allowed them to devote some of their time to working on it. So that's one way forward.
I think there's something you've written down there is, you know, see the technical practicalities, but how much of this is about cultural change, but cultural awareness, I think. You know, there could be people out there who don't really know about standards, but actually might have a lot to contribute to that boosts that volunteer effort, and I guess that's about communicating all the various initiatives that are out there. Anyone else got any comments, questions? Yes.
Just to pick up on that question, so I'm Steve McEwen. The hat I'll put on here is the DDI Alliance, which is the Social Science Data Standard. It's been around since the 90s. The basis for it is really from the 70s. What do you need to aim for in terms of funded versus voluntary effort? The DDIs have been working through this for several years. And my quick guess on this is it's when you need to do the things that you can't rely on for voluntary effort, fundamentally. So in our case, it was in two areas: coordination and communication. And the third one that was increasingly becoming the case is when do you need essentially to be kind of coordinated infrastructure, like a registry or something like that. So things that really you don't want to be saying this is a voluntary effort. This is actually a thing that we need to sort of have the funded activities that are there. And it's that sort of dynamic. You will always get far more resources from voluntary effort than, you know, 10 to 20 to 1 kind of effort is my guess. But I think that's kind of where the core of that's at, is what are the things you absolutely have to rely upon that you essentially need to have funded support.
Of course, an observation about as soon as you need to get into registries and technical infrastructure, that's not just a one-off, that needs to be maintained going forward. So you don't just need to buy in that expertise, you need to think how you're going to continue to buy it in to develop Any other comments people are itching to make? I've got some questions that emerged. I think one that came to the surface is actually one of the talks first thing this morning. I think somebody said governance is really important because it helps instill trust. And I just wondered if people had thoughts on when the governance matters. I think on geochemistry you said governance actually early on. There's other views I've heard expressed that, well, you need to wait to see what you've got before you start worrying about what the governance model is. Does anyone have any comments from their experience of, if you were starting today, when would you worry about governance?
Nina Welty-Syro. We have, so as a new person on the scene, so we have Isotopes AU, which is a stable isotope federated platform, similar to PSDI, but we started with governance because we needed a commercial model to sustain us because we knew we couldn't rely on any funding source, and that made the conversations around, well, wait, we're scientists, why do we get money, happen early on before we had something with a brand and an ID and more investment, so it helped us start. We front-loaded the governance conversation really early on because we thought without that we can't figure out how we keep going without it.
Anyone else got comments on? We're going to.
Yeah, actually, I mean, what you just said triggered a question with comment about one geochemistry where we've been discussing, you know, do we need to become a legal entity, a non-profit, in order to actually obtain funding that goes to the organization and not to one of the members. And the big challenge there obviously is the international aspect of the organization, and I'm just wondering what the experiences or advice is, you know, how to solve this issue of operating internationally and deciding which country is going to host the organization, and you know that's been a big and long-term discussion within the organization.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I discussed governance in my slide. So we, as I said, we had a little bit of seed money, and we needed to get the governance put together really quickly in order to get more money, because the members were willing to put in money, but we had to have some sort of organization to put the money into. So that was so the governance came almost first. The other thing, though, was that rather than trying to form a legal entity immediately, we had this Human Frontier Science Program organization agreed to host us. So they accepted the money on our behalf. So that was extremely fortuitous, because it meant we didn't have to do a lot of work developing a legal entity, which we later did. We did that later. So and the answer to your question about developing a legal entity is that there's many ways to do this. When we looked at this, we did some jurisdiction shopping. We looked around at various options. And there are easy and harder ways to do it. And it depends a little bit on where your money's coming from. If a lot of your money is European, you'll probably want to put it in a European country. But the legal entity will be in one jurisdiction, in one country, or even in one place in one country. And that doesn't matter. You can still run an international organization. You just have to pick a legal jurisdiction and do it there. And how you want to run the organization may dictate where you go, but it may not. It may just be convenience.
Yeah, I wonder if this is something where there's opportunity to share experiences so we don't all have to do the same reason.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Magnus Fröhling from Hammers Association in Germany. I would just like to remind you that the governance also to the outside shows how serious you are on the topic. It's not necessarily a legal thing, but I realize that as Helmholtz, we're not trying to set up anything ourselves. We're all the time trying to join existing initiatives. So if we see a governance that allows participation, that's a big plus for any activity that we see. The other thing we look at is business models. You know, is that something that is, you know, going belly up in a couple of years when the funding runs out, or is this a really strong community-driven effort? And governance, business models, all these are arguments that drive your decision whether you want to participate within activity or not. So I would second that. Governance is actually quite important, and doesn't necessarily have to come first, but it requires you to make certain decisions on how you conduct the cooperation. And I think that's very critical and crucial.
Thank you for that. Felix, did you want to add?
I wanted to come back to the aspect you mentioned about the internationality, and I think this is a key aspect. If we talk about standards, we have to concentrate from the beginning on internationally. So we need to look for standards that are there internationally and connect to them in an early stage, and that often doesn't fit to the governance model of project funding, because many initiatives get funding and then they start building their own things, their own standards, and the better step would always be to look what's available and connect to other initiatives, and that doesn't fit together. Yeah. And in Germany, so the NFDI, we get national funding, but of course we are not a national initiative. We try to be an international initiative and connect to IUPAC, to GoFair, the RDA, and so on. We did so in an early stage already.
Actually, geochemistry has that connection to NFDI.
Yeah, so maybe says that there's roles for organisations that help to give that international legitimacy, even though the practicality is they might be regional initiatives.
That reflection on the international part, and where to sort of embed the governance. So I've got 3 organisations that I have this sort of hat on, and one of the implications of the choices of where you locate yourself and the legal entities that are there is tied into the resourcing you get from the place in which you're located or the resourcing that's available to you. So, for example, the DDI Alliance is essentially has a secretariat at the University of Michigan, which means all the infrastructure that comes from the University of Michigan's administrative systems comes with that. The Database Consortium, which is currently looking at the sustainability model that's there, is currently kind of coming out of the University of North Carolina that is looking at a non-profit model that's there. The consequence of that is now you have to operate your own independent organisation that comes along with that as well. So in the sustainability questions is you're saying, what are you trading off in the models that you're actually looking at in terms of your legal and other operational status, and evaluating that in terms of the management of your overall set of funded and unfunded resources or voluntary resources. Bringing those things together is an important question, isn't it?
I think, just as a comment as I walk the microphone over, well, I think the PDB model is quite an interesting one in some ways, because you've got 3, possibly coming up for 4 or 5 regional places who can attract local funding but contribute to a sort of common core of an international archive with international standards. So I think that's worth thinking about.
My question was on the same topic of, is it, because the internationality is a feature but also a bug, because it's really hard to attract international funding. Sitting in Australia, nobody wants to fund anything not in Australia. So, but operating like a regional hub and spoke model, if you've got multiple partners, you're able to actually attract funding locally but agree to direct it globally. Is that being explored in all, other than the PDB effort?
Sure, that's a direct response to that.
As I said, Global Validated Coalition's raison d'etre is to find ways to sustain funding for data resources. So we've done a lot of work on this. We had a workshop in Canada a couple months ago, and we have a white paper that we've published on sustainability of data resources, which you can get from our website. And I won't describe various models, but there are lots of different models, and a couple of them depend on these sort of distributed systems where in this case, the data resource is global but has local hubs that are funded locally, and they cooperate like PDB. So that's a fairly well-established and successful model.
I'm Michelle Barker from the Research Software Alliance, which is an international organisation which facilitates conversations, a bit like some of you, but around things to do with research software. Just on the, where you house yourself question, we use a fiscal sponsor, which is a model quite common in the US. There's a number of organisations who take 10 to 15% of everything that we bring in, but provide us all the legal structure, all the financial structures, do our invoicing and contracts for us, and also have a lot of connections throughout the funding community, so sometimes help us find funding. And I know there's at least a couple of organisations that do that in Europe, or they mightn't be called fiscal sponsors, but that works well for us.
Yeah, oh, right, okay.
Right, thanks, Michelle. I hadn't heard that term before, but the European Science Foundation in Strasbourg does that too.
And then I want to lead us on to one sort of like final question.
I can share our example of how to expand our international collaboration. And as I already told you, the beginning is on United States only. Then when structural genomics, a national project, performed in worldwide, then we anticipate more and more data. Then European data center, Japanese data center started, supported by each regional governments, Japanese government and EU. And then now, China is the second largest data producing country. Then we invited China to be associate member. Then they promised to provide the money for the government basis and space and people, but they didn't have any experience to perform such kind of big data managements. Then we changed our charter to host as an associate member first. Then after evaluating their performance, they can be a full member. Such kind of system we established, and then now we invite it, and then they start processing locally there, and then I think sooner we can evaluate their performance, and then if everything is okay, then become a core member. Very long time plan to host a new member. Yeah, that is one example.
It's sort of like having an onboarding plan, if you like, that helps people get to that point, which is great. Right. I don't know how much time we got left, but I want to just throw out, Kerstin, I think you mentioned in your talk how having the welfare experience, sort of working more closely with other people, was an inspiration. So I just want to give people, if there was one thing that we came back and discussed as a sort of loose collective of people, does anyone want to volunteer what they think is the most thing that might be most fertile for cross-community discussion? Or should we just not repeat this over?
I'll give you a novel answer that I recently saw a grant awarded for 6 organisations who were exploring how they could kind of work together. Well, it's similar challenges in raising funds and governance, etc., and how they could learn from each other. So funds for things like that exist.
I mean, I think one of the things that's kind of one of the biggest challenges and like is just basically awareness of all of the other things that are kind of going on, and but not also like haven't necessarily been completed but are being actively worked on, because otherwise, I mean, aligning yourself so it's like, oh well, maybe you'll take lead on that and we'll input into your work, but we'll take the lead on this other part. So like having that coordination and kind of, I just guess better sharing of that kind of aspect so that we can not be doing the same things in different ways unless we need to.
I actually want to put the last question on there. So I mentioned I have 3 organisations. The third one, I was the co-data treasurer. So it's my job to be sitting there thinking about this all the time as part of that. So my question to this group is that a sort of thing you'd like to see coming from co-data? We have the General Assembly coming up at the end of this week. Is that an area? I mean, there was a very big effort around World Fair, as an example, and it really was a big collaboration. Is that the sort of thing that would be of interest? That it's one thing co-data could consider, and Richard, who was listed there as well, as part of the executive as well. But it's part of, it is kind of that question, if that was of interest.
So, the executive director from CoData isn't here, even though his name was on it. But I'm going to channel him. Some of you will know that several years ago, CoData worked with the OECD to look at business models for sustaining data repositories. And Simon has been saying over the last 2 years he would love to do something similar for data standards. And this is officially on the record, but he approached them and they weren't particularly interested. So that does, I suppose, raise the interest of Kerstin. Is there something that you should, by formalising this as some sort of task group within CoData, does it give us, thinking about that governance, that's sort of like establishing something, looking at an organisation that's credible, to find some other partner organisation that maybe does that sort of thing that we were talking about getting funding for several organisations to look at how we sustain these things and identifying those common options. So personally, I would say, why wouldn't CoData want to do this? Obviously, General Assembly, we get the proposal in time, probably not just now, but how we can sow that seed.
Surfacing that conversation is really if that's the will of the people. Surfacing that conversation would be fairly straightforward to do.
So, can we have a show of hands in the room? Who would like CoData to take a proactive role in doing this? And you can say that. Does anyone object to CoData having a role in this? Nobody objected, unanimously carried.
I'd also say briefly, I'll apologise for Simon not being here. He's running another session.
Anything else anyone wants to sort of like throw in that they feel that came out of the talks but hasn't surfaced in the conversation? I've got other things that I noted, I think. But I think it's otherwise been very interesting to hear all these things sort of talked about in one particular session, and different aspects, different pathways, different journeys, similar challenges. So it's been great. So yeah, thank you all very much for the presentations and for the discussion.